And next, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Phyllis Braxton. And I'll have you come on stage, Phyllis Braxton. Feel free to show your video. Phyllis Braxton is a mother, wife, author, and author of Be Right or Be Effective, coming March 2023, as well as author of Good Intentions, Bad Results, which is also coming up April 2023. She is an artist, interculturalist, and a world-renowned Marvel thought leader, bridging theory and practice in the DEI and self-care space. Phyllis has over 25 years of international touchpoints with tens of thousands of people. With experience in trauma-informed diversity, equity, inclusion training and facilitation, leadership coaching, conflict communication, intercultural competence, organizational development, and a former clinical therapist. Phyllis received her BA from Morris Brown College in Atlanta, Georgia, Master's of Adult Education from the University of Minnesota, and a Master's of Clinical Social Work from St. Catherine's University. She is one of the international training faculty of the Intercultural Development Inventory that assesses intercultural competence, was an adjunct professor, and has studied diversity and experienced cultural trends from Iceland to Dubai and the Deep South to the West Coast. She helps others leverage their identities and experience to foster healthy relationships for more inclusive workplace outcomes and home life satisfaction. Thank you and welcome, Phyllis.
Hello, 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 everyone. And thank you, Rebecca. I am so excited to be here with you today. Hopefully, I've put together an agenda that is going to be helpful for you in your awareness, especially around intercultural development and around this whole concept and topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so with that, I am going to have us jump right in with an activity. This activity, I'm going to ask you to use the chat function within this platform to respond. All right, so this is how the activity will work. I'm going to put something on the screen. I'm going to give you some instructions, and then you will put your answer in the chat, but do not press enter. Put your answer in the chat, but do not press enter. We will all press enter at the same time and have a little chat storm going on. All right, so here we go. What I would like for you to do is read the statement and count the number of times you see the letter F. Read the statement and count the number of times you see the letter F. Couple more seconds. All right. Now, without pressing enter, put your answer in the chat. And then we will all press enter on the count of 3. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, enter. All right, take a look in the chat. Scroll in your chat and see what's happening. Now, we could spend all day just debriefing this activity. In the context of our session today, I wanted to do this activity for one reason and one reason only. And that is, we can be in the same place at the same time and have a different experience. I can work in the same building, in the same department, on the same team with my peers, my colleagues, and we are each experiencing that experience differently. The connection I'd like for you to make is that when we are engaging across cultural differences, more oftentimes than not, folks are experiencing their experience differently. I look like I am paused on my camera, so I want to just do a quick check-in that you are still able to hear me. Their answer to the
Yes.
statement, and as you all can see, we had a variety of responses from looking at the same thing and being given the same instructions. In short, when we are operating across cultural differences, more oftentimes than not, people are experiencing their experience differently. And that is often because we're not working with shared meaning, with a shared language. And so our session today is really going to be about giving us shared meaning around what are these words that are being used to even have conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. What is it that I need to be aware of and know as a leader, whether that's of my family, a leader in my community, a leader in my organization? What are some of the new practices that are happening that I should be aware of when it comes to engaging across cultural differences? So this session is really going to focus around the concept of culture. Oftentimes our behavior can be explained in three different ways: our biological makeup, our personality, and our culture. Culture is that realm that is 100% taught to all members of a group, a family, or a community as the right way to do something. And so first, we're going to start out getting shared language and kind of a maybe an update on how are people even using these words. The first one we're going to talk about is culture. This is that big umbrella under which all kinds of differences fall. Culture is about patterns of beliefs and values that people are using to help them make sense of the world. And culture is that thing that has been taught as the right way to do something. When you think about an iceberg and the analogy that it has to diversity, just like an iceberg where we can only see the very tip or about 10%. I was doing a workshop with some leaders in Montreal, Canada, and I was showing this iceberg and I asked the group, how much of an iceberg can you see? And the group, most people said about 10%. And then there was one guy in the back, he said, oh no, it's 15% now because of global warming. right? But it's still a small percentage. And that's analogous to culture. Just by looking at a person, we are not accurately able to assume all of the things that makes up their culture. We might see race that we're assuming. We might see gender that we're assuming, depending on different type of cultural practices and the way people dress, we might be able to make some assumptions. But most of the ways that people are behaving and why we behave the way we behave is most often out of our awareness. Think about something as an example like eye behavior. Each one of us growing up was probably given some messages or taught something about what we should do or should not do with our eyes. And what we've often learned in the US is that people teach, look a person in the eyes because it shows respect. Look a person in the eye because it means you're paying attention. Well, one of the cultural values that is connected to eye behavior in most Western cultures is truth telling. We're often asking people, look me in the eye, so then I'll believe that you're not telling me a lie. Think about that. There are many cultures who uses eye behavior where they may not look you directly in the eyes as a sign of respect. So depending on your cultural context, just that one concept of how people are behaving with their eyes can cause a whole lot of conflict and misunderstanding. It's in those little things is where culture lives. What about the word diversity? Oftentimes, in my experience, folks are using diversity as a code word for something more specific. In this workshop, when I say diversity, I simply mean the mix of differences. All of those different ways that humans differ from each other. When I'm doing work, let's say, for example, I currently live in North Minneapolis. When I do work in the most southern parts of the state or the most northern parts of the state, folks will often say, Phyllis, where'd you drive in from? And I said, oh, I came in from Minneapolis. And the expression changes. And oftentimes they say, oh, that's really culturally diverse. Oftentimes, that is used as a code word to really talk about race. And oftentimes, what folks really mean is there's a lot of Black people who live in North Minneapolis. So, when you're using the word diversity, if you're talking about something specific, be willing to name that. Otherwise, if we're using diversity as the bucket for all kinds of differences, we can begin to get confused and not be on the same page around what we actually mean when we say diversity. In some institutions, diversity means we want more people of color. In some organizations, diversity means we want to see more gender differences. So diversity can be used as a code word when folks don't always feel comfortable in naming the difference that they really want to pay attention to. Inclusion a lot of times diversity and inclusion is used together. Inclusion requires different behaviors than what it took to actually attract and recruit diversity. If we want those differences to feel included, then we really need to take a look at our culture. Are we assuming that everyone feels heard, valued, or seen? And so just because we have differences and diversity in our workplaces, on our teams, the next question is, do those differences feel like they're able to authentically show up in those differences, or do they feel like they have to minimize those differences to fit in with the dominant cultural group? So write in chat for me the answer to this question. Most of us probably learned it in elementary school. What should you do if you catch on fire? The answer is 3 words. Write it in your chat. What should you do? Yes, there you go. Stop, drop, and roll. We know that. We've been taught that from a very early age. We can recite it like a choir. But what do you notice happen when people actually catch on fire? They are not able to practice in real time the thing that they know that they should do. Yes, Elizabeth, they run. And oftentimes it takes someone outside of them to jump on top of them, roll them around on the ground to put the fire out. This is my analogy to the difference between diversity training and intercultural competency training. Diversity training, it'll give us language, it will give us frameworks and definitions, and we leave with new knowledge. But oftentimes, we don't know what we should do with all of that new knowledge that we just got. Intercultural competence training is a process of giving people interactive experiences that allows them in the moment to learn new tools and practice them so that they develop into a skill. So intercultural competence is about self-awareness, and it's about other awareness. And do I have the skill set to adapt and shift my perspective and my behavior to be more effective across cultural differences and commonalities? So let me try to bring all of these definitions together. Inclusion is not a byproduct of diversity. Oftentimes, institutions are really good at attracting and recruiting diversity, but they often wonder why they are having a hard time retaining that diversity, which is the inclusion piece. What's usually often missing is intercultural competency building. There is a huge myth that if folks are educated, if folks are well-traveled, if folks were born and raised in the US, that they should have this awareness about differences. And nothing could be further from the truth. We learn about diversity and differences just like we learn about most other things, in a developmental way. And so we're going to get through our next two definitions, and then I want to talk about what are the different ways that people are experiencing cultural differences, and then what are the needs that people might have to build their awareness and skills to be more effective across cultural differences, so that we get that inclusion that we want. Equality and equity. Folks used to, like Rebecca said in my intro, I've been doing this work for a little bit over 25 years. And I have seen the transition in people using these words interchangeably. Now, folks have a little bit more awareness that these two words mean different things. Equality. It is about giving everyone the same thing, and that's how I know I'm being fair. Equity is about giving each person what they need to accomplish the goal, and that is how a person would practice fairness. Equality focuses on what we put in, inputs. Let's give everyone the same thing. That way people will think that we're fair. Equity focuses on the outcomes. What do we need to put in to get the outcomes that we want across the board? You've probably seen a lot of different illustrations that talks about equality and equity. This is one that I find to be very helpful because some focuses just on race. This one focuses on ability, which is a difference that makes a difference. And so, as you can see, with equality, if we give everyone the same thing, we may not meet people where they are for them to be able to accomplish the goal. Equity is about resources. How much or what kinds of resources might each person need in order to be able to meet or reach the goal? Before I have us shift into talking about how people are experiencing cultural differences, I want to just pause just to see if there are any burning questions coming up for anyone just around the definitions that I've shared so far. Any burning questions you might have on the definitions? You can either write in chat. I have my chat up. I can see that. Or I might be able to get a little assistance from Rebecca. If she sees someone raise their hand, she can let me know. I know we usually hold the Q&A at the very end.
That's okay. There is a question here. How are you defining the culture? How are you defining the culture in intercultural?
So inter simply means between. Culture is saying, what are the patterns that this person might have that's showing up that helps them engage across that difference? So culture here is just about patterns of differences that may make a difference in how we engage with each other.
Yeah,
Intercultural.
yeah.
Mhm.
Do you want to answer another? I have like a few more questions that just came in. Do you want to answer those now, or would you like to hold them off to the end?
Yep, I will answer the one about equality and equity, and then I'll answer the one about justice when we
Okay.
come back to the end. So are equity and equality necessarily mutually exclusive? Oh, that's good, Seth. So here's the thing. When organizations say we want to be more equitable, they oftentimes are using equality to try to become equitable. Meaning, Phyllis, we're giving everyone the same thing. So therefore, everyone should be able to reach or meet the goal. What I would offer up is not one of these words is better than the other. They mean different things and they're going to get you different outcomes. What I have learned in my time of doing this work is that before organizations can truly practice equality, they kind of need to have equity in check. Because if we're trying to practice equality first, that means we're not going to be paying attention to folks who might not be playing on the same field as everyone else to even begin with. So they are not mutually exclusive. I really see them having interfacing and connecting with each other. But oftentimes within organizations, it really takes them sitting down, having a conversation according to our mission, vision, values, and goals. What does equity look like? And what would equality look like? And once we look at that and anticipate what the outcomes would be, then we get to make a decision. Do we need to practice equity in this particular context? Or do we need to practice equality in this particular context? I hope that was helpful. All right. So there is a theory that whenever we are engaging across cultural differences, we cannot assume how that person might be experiencing it. And so what I want to do, and I'm going to just check in quick to see if the video is playing, since I've had a couple different technical issues, and then you can give me a quick thumbs up and then I can pause it.
Achieving equity goals is more likely when we build capacity to adapt to cultural differences.
Just want to check in. Rebecca, were you able to see and hear that?
Yes, we can hear it and see it.
Okay, awesome. So this short video is going to give us a high level overview of this theory of experiencing cultural differences. There are 5 stages of development on this journey that a person might experience cultural differences. Some of us are used to frameworks that are in the, for example, that are in a anti-racism context, where you might say either a person is racist or they're not. This framework says there's some shades of gray, that when we're interacting across cultural differences, things aren't just right or wrong, good or bad, black and white. But we have to look at the context and we have to look at history to try to make sense of what might be happening in that moment across those differences. There are 5 stages of development. When a person is early in their development, they might have not had a lot of experiences across cultural differences, or they may have had negative experiences across cultural differences that's making them judgmental. Then you have folks that are in the very middle, that are very open to diversity, want to experience differences, but oftentimes don't know what it is that they don't know. And then in the later 2 stages of development, this is where people have more advanced or in-depth knowledge of more specific cultural differences that allows them to shift their perspective and behavior to engage with effectiveness. So I'm going to show this short video, and then afterwards I'll give a little commentary, and we will have an opportunity to do a quick reflection and take some more of your questions. So here we go.
Achieving equity goals is more likely when we build capacity to adapt to cultural differences. Our journey to build that capacity follows the Intercultural Development Continuum, or IDC, and is measured by the Intercultural Development Inventory, or IDI, developed by Dr. Mitchell Hammer and IDI LLC. The IDC tells us that we experience culture through one of 5 mindsets: from monocultural, where we have a more limited understanding of culture, which may result in avoiding or judging cultural differences, to minimization, a mindset which overemphasizes commonalities and misses important cultural differences, to the intercultural mindsets of acceptance and adaptation. This is where an individual can effectively shift their cultural perspective and behavior to bridge differences to achieve their equity goals. The IDI measures our mindset and provides insights on where someone is in their journey, as well as guidance for growth. In denial, we miss or avoid difference. Our opportunity is to start noticing the breadth and depth of culture, from food and clothing to values, behaviors, and expectations. As we begin to notice difference, we move into polarization, taking an us versus them orientation. When we start to notice differences, we realize that we're having a different experience from others. This can bring up anger, fear, or shame. We may find ourselves in polarization as we realize the daily impacts of injustices like racism and sexism. If we're trying to more effectively bridge differences, our opportunity in this mindset is to find commonalities between us and whichever cultures we're judging. When we learn to focus on commonalities, we move into minimization, where we tend to overemphasize commonalities across culture. Some of us in non-dominant culture groups minimize our differences just to get along in a dominant culture space. We do this often subconsciously as a survival strategy. Others of us in dominant culture groups don't even realize that what we're doing is cultural. We've been taught that one size fits all, and it turns out that's the size that was created by us, for us, and with us in mind. In minimization, all of us tend to focus on making sure that dominant culture remains comfortable. This is based on the false assumption from dominant culture that if we're comfortable, everyone else will be too. For all of us in this mindset, our opportunity here is to build our cultural self-awareness. With deeper cultural self-awareness, we move into the mindset of acceptance. In acceptance, we can notice complex cultural differences without judgment. Yet, we often feel stuck here, not wanting to shift because we don't want to make a wrong move in pursuit of our goals. From here, we practice trying various shifts out and learning from them. We get clearer in our values and work to ensure that our shifted actions align with those values, even when that might be difficult for some. With intention, reflection, and practice, we move into adaptation. Here, we're more likely to effectively shift our perspective and behavior to bridge cultural differences and meet our equity goals. Our opportunity is to keep learning and practicing while maintaining curiosity and humility. Because no matter our work, our capacity to navigate cultural differences is essential to advancing equity goals. Achieve.
All right. So these are the 5 stages of development. And what we know from the research is that when we are engaging across cultural differences, each of us is operating predominantly from one of these stages. Each stage has a strength, and each stage has a developmental opportunity. In the different stages, people need different kinds of learning to make sure that they don't get paralyzed and regress, but that they are being met where they are so that they can continue moving along the continuum. When I am working with organizations, one of the first things I want to do is take an assessment. Just because most often organizations that I work with, they will say something like, well, Phyllis, we're a white organization. Now, I could easily say, oh, predominantly white, all white, that must mean you need anti-racism training. What we know from the research is that 85% of people are not developmentally ready for conversations around race. Now, let me be very clear. As a Black woman in America, I am not saying that we should not do anti-racism training. It is a must. We have to do that if we're serious about getting transformational change and having more equitable institutions and a just world. It is important to understand that because of our experiences, everyone is not coming to the table prepared or developmentally ready to have those conversations. And what often happens is that most of the folks in that training will feel blamed, shamed, paralyzed, stuck, or angry, and we don't make progress. What I am saying is to get to those important conversations that we have to have, we need to develop people's capacity to be able to do and have those conversations to get more effective outcomes. So that is a very short overview of this model and framework. You will get all of my slides after the workshop today, and I'll make sure that I include the link to the website where you can learn more about this particular framework. So with that, I want to make sure we get an opportunity to answer some more questions, and we'll start with the one that was put in the chat a little bit earlier. And on this one, Gilbert, I might have to ask you to give me just a little bit more commentary because words have different meanings to different people, right? So what is the relationship to the terms and justice? So when you're talking about justice, can you just give me a little bit more insight as to what you mean when you say talk about the pursuit of justice? Oh, I think I may have just misread a word in that. Is it possible to pursue equity without achieving justice? Gilbert, I see that happen quite a bit. Organizations that are on the journey, they're trying to be aware, trying to develop skills to have more difficult conversations to try to figure out what are the inequities that are there that's keeping us from getting justice. Now, in some organizations, you might have to ask if justice is a goal. Because for many, justice isn't even thought of in the context of a workplace setting when folks are talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's just, you know, in my experience there. I hope that was helpful, or that got at it. Rebecca?
Yeah, it looks like there's another question here. It says, rather than just this nice arch forward between minimization and acceptance, isn't there the potential to veer totally off in a different direction and become pure racist rather than just ignorant? That is what it says.
All right. Thank you for that question. So what we know when we're talking about culture, this is specifically in the realm of cultural differences, that folks will show up in one of these 5 stages. When we are naming and I'm to quote, become pure racist, and when I hear that, what I think of is for some reason, just the word evil is like coming into my mind. People who have a deep seated belief that white people are superior and people of color are less than. It is possible that a person is very early in their development. Now, the other thing about moving along this continuum is that people got to want to. This is not one of those topics that you can force anyone to learn. People have to come open. And when folks are open, I have seen miraculous things happen with a person moving from a very early stage of development where there is defensiveness, where there is judgment, where there are stereotypes and implicit and explicit bias. When folks are open, I've seen the ability and capacity for people to grow. So I'm not sure how else other to answer that question than a person that's a pure racist is probably going to be a person that's not even open. And while I am a very hopeful person in this work, I also know that with anything, everyone is not going to be on board with it. And that's why the work is so hard.
Very true. We have about 3 more questions here, but we'll see what we have time for.
Okay.
There's 2 questions from one person. I'll start with the first question. What do you say to team members who are in the adaptation and frustrated with folks in minimization and the developmental approach? They want to have action now.
Yeah. Oh, I know it. I feel it. I see this happening so often, where you have a very small percentage, and actually I think I do have some data here. A very small percentage of people are in that stage of adaptation. So let me just validate that it can feel very lonely being in that stage where you are hearing, seeing things in very complex ways and know that it's impacting folks in negative ways. And you're looking around like, it's going on here? How can people be missing it? And so when folks in adaptation, one of the things that I talk about with them more often privately is, where's your support system? For folks in adaptation, they're oftentimes extremely exhausted because of how much they know. They are usually the people that's taking on having to do the shifting and adapting. And if you're doing that all the time, you can begin to kind of say to yourself, wait a minute, I'm acting this way with this person. I got to talk this way with this person so I don't lose my job. Who the heck am I really? And so in adaptation, one of the things that I coach is, it is so important for you to find your people. Where is that group, small group of people who you know get it in the way that you get it, that you're able to have as that sounding board, as that respite, as that retreat, to be able to go and say, something that happened to me today. Am I being consistent? We need those folks that we can have those conversations with, that get it, and that's not gonna re-victimize us for being a member of the non-dominant culture, possibly, and being further along that continuum. So in short, you may not get what you're looking for as support internally because folks yet have not developed those skills or that capacity. And so knowing that you might need to look outside of your organization or your community for that support, hopefully that might be helpful. But it is a unfortunate kind of situation where you're tapping your toe, waiting on everyone else to get there. And like I said, if folks aren't on board or on the train willingly, it takes a whole lot more energy to try to get folks moving closer towards that acceptance and adaptation.
Great, thank you so much, Phyllis. And I don't think we're going to have time to answer another question. We are getting closer to 1 p.m. and I definitely want to be respectful of everyone's time. I really appreciate your knowledge you shared with us today, Phyllis, and all the great information. We'll be, oh yeah, feel free to share the slide before we can make a mention of that. As I mentioned earlier, my introduction, Phyllis is coming out with a book and it's releasing in March 11th, I believe you said. Correct me if I'm wrong, and it'll be available on Amazon. We'll share this slide deck with this information and also information in the email that you receive after this. So you'll be receiving an email with information about any upcoming events, information about the Maroon and Gold Network that you see here on the screen about how to connect with other alums and students through our Maroon and Gold Network. And then you'll also receive the recording of this webinar along with the slides. So I really appreciate everyone's time and attention and patience, and we look forward to hosting another webinar in the future. Thank you and have a great day.